Hello, and welcome to Games Past the Prime. This show where I take a look at video games to determine if they are past their prime or not. For me to do so, though, there are a couple key categories which I look at. Story, presentation, and gameplay. Then there's a conclusion section at the end where I wrap everything up in a nice little bow. You guys have read the title. You know what game we're playing. Let's take a look at Medal of Honor: Rising Sun. The story of Rising Sun follows the history of World War II with the Americans fighting Japan. You play as a U.S. Marine named Joe, and he awakens on the USS California to the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor. He makes his way topside while putting out fires, and once there, Joe is ordered to jump on one of the guns and start shooting down the planes and any torpedoes in the water. However, soon enough, Joe is blown off the ship, but happens to be rescued by a PT boat with some of his other comrades. Joe jumps on the turret of the boat and continues to shoot down planes. Soon enough, he witnesses the sinking of the USS Arizona, and then they try and defend the USS Nevada as it attempts to escape the harbor. Then, on January 1st of 1942, Joe and Gunny are stationed in the Philippines, where they meet up with Joe's younger brother, Donnie, who's in the Marine Demolition Unit. Donnie and the demo unit need to blow up Calumpit Bridge, but their demo truck got captured. The three of them managed to get the truck back and blow the bridge up, but Donnie was still inside the tank that happened to be overrun by Japanese soldiers. It is now presumed Donnie is dead. Then, on August 7th of 1942, Gunny, Joe, and two other Marines are sent out on part of a midnight raid on Guadalcanal to take an airfield and destroy an ammo dump before a main assault starts at dawn. On October 14th of 1942, the Japanese happened to be hammering down on the US troops with artillery that was codenamed Pistol Pete. Gunny gives Joe two Marines and tells him to take out Pistol Pete. Joe manages to do just that, and along the way they meet up with Martin Clemens, a Scottish guerrilla fighter and coast watcher, two natives. They also happen to rescue a POW named Edmund Harrison, who happens to be a demo expert that helps to blow up the artillery guns. At the end of the mission, Gunny recommends Joe to the Office of Strategic Services and is then promoted to sergeant. In March of 1943, Joe is sent into a Japanese-occupied Singapore to infiltrate a top-secret Axis summit. He meets up with Tanaka, a Japanese-American OSS operative, and Philip Bromley, a British SOE operative. Joe manages to steal a German colonel uniform and make his way into the summit, where the Japanese commander reveals the discovery of large deposits of gold in Burma. Joe's cover is then blown, and Bromley arrives to help Joe escape the hotel the summit was held in.
FBI, open up!
They manage to escape thanks to Tanaka picking them up in a double-decker bus. On April 26, 1944, the three of them are sent on a mission to check out the gold smelting operations on Burma. While there, one of the pilots that they were using for recon gets shot down, and the three set to work to get him back. Bromley and his men destroy 4 AA guns, so a proper airstrike can be conducted while Tanaka and Joe infiltrate the temples to rescue Raj the pilot. Once there, they rescue Raj and the strikes go down. The mission ends up being successful. On July 17th of 1944, Joe happens to fall out of a plane while in Thailand, where they were investigating a train with Shima's gold in it. Joe manages to meet up with Bromley, and the two of them end up blowing up a train full of Shima's gold, but they find out most of it has been moved to Shima's supercarrier, so Joe, Bromley, and Tanaka take a plane to get there and are able to land thanks to Tanaka. While on board, Bromley and Joe go below deck while Tanaka manages to make his way into the officers' quarters. However, Joe and Bromley end up getting gassed and captured and are interrogated by Shima himself. Tanaka happens to also be in the room during this and manages to free Joe, but he happens to be killed by Shima afterwards. Shima runs off as Bromley also escapes, and Joe happens to run after Shima. After fighting through more of the ship, he sees that Shima is escaping with his brother Donnie in a plane, the same Donnie that was assumed to be dead at this point. Eventually, Joe and Bromley meet on the deck of the ship and happen to steal a ship. After a couple of failed takeoffs and Joe shooting down as many planes as possible, they happen to escape the ship as it explodes, and Bromley mourns the death of Tanaka, but declares that they will search for Donnie. This is where the story ends, in a really shitty cliffhanger.
Fuck you! Fuck you!
Listen, I'm all for a cliffhanger and a good story to try and excite people for the next game, but this is a Medal of Honor game, where the story from game to games are really rarely connected. So I'm not sure what the point of this was. I guess at the end of the Medal of Honor game on the PSP, it's revealed that Joe was doing POW rescue raids, and that he managed to eventually rescue Donnie, his brother. That's cool and all, but that game came out 3 years after this one, when I imagine people honestly stopped caring. I guess the story is passable here. Again, it feels like you are playing this super soldier, which is to be expected for these types of games, but I never really felt all that invested into the actual story. For example, when Tanaka died, I was just like, yeah, okay, I remember him, guess he's dead now. Then when they brought back the brother thing, I was like, oh, they're making this a revenge story now? Interesting. But this is brought up at the last level of the game, so I never really gave a damn about any of that.
I don't care. I don't care.
If the game would have continued to where Joe was fighting tooth and nail for his brother, I could have gotten more behind it, I think. But in this case, it felt rather rushed. Like I said, in an FPS game, the story only needs to be okay. The more important parts tend to be the presentation and gameplay. Speaking of, let's jump into that presentation section. Alright, so right away, just like the previous Medal of Honor, you'll see that this game looks pretty good. I mean, I would be surprised if it didn't, being that this is on the PS2 and happens to come after Frontline, which I reviewed earlier. One thing I will say that I'm glad they seem to fix is that the game doesn't appear to be nearly as dark. Now this is mostly due to the missions taking place during the day, but even the two that were at night were still properly lit, and I didn't have nearly as many issues seeing anything as I did from the previous game.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Now, there are a couple things that did bother me though. For example, there didn't seem to be as wide of a variety of weapons. Several missions, I felt like I was using the same guns over and over again, which to be honest, got pretty darn boring. On top of that, it was the same case when it came to the levels.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
It felt like most of the middle levels of the game were of jungles and forests. And listen, I understand that this is where a lot of fighting took place, but you could have done a better job with the environment to make them stand out from one another. Even though we are jumping from country to country, it felt like I was in the same place on a lot of these levels. So frankly, this part also bored me to no end. However, thankfully this game doesn't overstay its welcome, and I will go into more detail on that in the gameplay section a little bit later. Now, let's move on to the sounds in the game. The voice acting is okay. Nothing fantastic, but the game does something similar to the last, where they show real clips from the war, but there is clearly not as many as before, which is a bit sad to see. Now, the gun sounds are still very good, one thing that I think this game does overall well. Most guns sound unique to them, and I didn't find any guns that had the same sounds to each other, which is very nice, because there are plenty of games where they end up reusing a lot of those sound effects. I think I would have actually been rather upset if I had found two guns with the same sound effects given the smaller list of weapons in the game. Then we move on to the music, and this is still done pretty well. I love that they happen to use a full orchestra for the music, gives it that very dramatic sound, and reminds me a lot of other soundtracks that do this kind of thing, sort of like Star Wars. So I think with that in mind, I will now play for you some of my favorite tracks from the game. Alright, so the gameplay is exactly like the previous other Medal of Honor game I reviewed, which is an FPS game. Now, before I go into depth about the things that I liked or didn't like, I think we should just jump into the control segment. Now, because it is still a Medal of Honor game, and if you watched my previous review on the other game, you may end up seeing the same controls, so I will be placing a timestamp on screen for you to skip if you so wish. Alright, so the left stick will move you forward, backward, and strafe, left, and right, while the right stick will allow you to look up and down, and move the cursor basically across the screen. X would be your interact button, so if I had anything to interact with, I'd press the X button in here. That would allow me to like jump on turrets or to go to a save station and save my game, stuff like that. Circle allows me to cycle through my weapons. There's only the one button, so I can't cycle back and forth. I can only cycle through all of them at once. Thankfully, I only have 2 here, so it's not a big deal. Sometimes you'll have like 3 or 4 weapons and you have to cycle through all of them to find the one you want. Square allows you to crouch or stand back up, while triangle allows you to jump. L1 allows you to go into your aim mode. While aiming, you can move the cursor left, right, up, and down. It's a little slower than normal. And I can't move. I can lean left. I can lean right. I can't lean up, obviously, but I can crouch down as well. R1 will allow me to fire the gun, while R2 will allow me to reload if I could. I can't do it with this gun, so let me switch here. Fire, reload. L2 will allow me to throw a grenade. The longer I hold it, the further he'll throw it. So for example, if I just tap it, pretty short throw. If I hold it, he'll do the max throw. Then if I press, say, L3, it'll center the view to where I'm looking. So you can see it get centered, so if I'm aiming up, it'll recenter it back down to that kind of normal horizontal plane. And then R3 will allow me to hit somebody with my weapon, so you can kind of butt them with that, or you can butt them with the end of this gun. It's just a melee attack, basically. That's all it is. D-pad doesn't do anything unless I have a sniper out. If I had a sniper and I was aiming down the sights, I could zoom in and out with the scope by pushing up or down on the D-pad. Unfortunately, I don't have a sniper here to show you that, so obviously you'll just have to take my word for it. If I press the start button, then I'll bring up the menu. This allows me to go through like the objectives that I need, any notes that I need to know, or frankly, this is mostly just bonus information. I mean, you can see how many hits you've taken, objectives complete, stuff like that. The preferences is the important part, because this allows you to go to a controller layout. In here, I can go with the default controls that are already selected for me, which is all the buttons that I've listed off already. You can change it to like a classic mode, different variants, multiplayer. You can even customize your own if you want to. So I kind of like how they have that options. On top of that, they even have more options. You can go to the controller options. You can see vibration, analog sensitivity, turn speed. So if you don't like default sensitivity of the controls for like movement or turning left and right, you can actually increase that sensitivity. I like how they have that option. And then obviously they have the invert y-axis. Why anyone would want that turned on, but there you go. At least you have the option to do so. I don't know who in their right mind would use it, but you have the option. So I don't think having those options hurt at all. I think they're only good overall to have. The more options you have, the better. Pretty much any player will be able to pick up and play it as is, but if there's somebody out there who's gotten used to a certain style of controls, they at least allow you to change them, which is nice. But that's basically all the controls. That is the majority of the important controls anyways. I don't know if there's anything else to really talk about. I mean, we've gone over shooting, reloading, we've gone over aiming and movement, we've gone over switching weapons, interacting with objects, crouching and jumping, which you basically rarely use. So yeah, I think with that said, we'll just jump to the main script again. Alright, now with the controls out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay and any improvements they may have made. So there is a lot to talk about in general here, so let's just run down some of the basic things. First, because this game takes place on the other side of the war fighting Japanese, this means that you will be fighting in mostly Asian countries, and this means seeing a lot of the same forest and jungle areas, sort of like what I mentioned earlier. When you aren't in these areas, the game looks very, very good, such as the city level where you're trying to infiltrate the summit meeting, or the very last level on that ship. These stand out as very memorable because they were so different from the rest of the levels. Now, some things that did improve on in this game from the other game is the recoil and accuracy of the weapons. Now, they still have plenty of recoil, and aren't always accurate like they should be, but this has been tuned up like I had talked about in the previous review. So clearly, even back then, they knew that what was happening in the previous game was still an issue, and they addressed it in this one, so props there. Because of this, I actually don't have many complaints about the actual gunplay because it feels good, it sounds good, and there really isn't much issue with that. Sadly, this is where my praise of the game kind of starts to slow down. First off, the damage of the guns seem pretty inconsistent outside of headshots. Sometimes I would shoot someone in the chest twice and they would die, then a different person would take 3 shots, or sometimes even more. Sometimes I would even shoot them in the chest and the AI would react like I shot their hand instead, which told me I wasn't doing much damage if they were, shaking their hand like that. I remember one time when I was shooting a guy in a turret. I was hitting his elbow because I didn't want to peek out and get shot by the turret. At this point, I think I had something like 6 to 8 shots in his elbow with a sniper rifle, and he still didn't die. So I had to peek out and actually headshot him. Now, you might be saying, of course he didn't die, you're shooting him in the damn elbow. See, I normally would agree with you, but there was a different time when I was shooting someone in the toes and they did die after about 3 or 4 shots. So I'm not sure exactly what was going on with that turret guy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because of that, there appears to be some weird hitboxes. Nothing all that unusual in an FPS game. Sometimes that happens, but this isn't where my complaints stop, sadly. Next, let's talk about the weapons, or lack thereof. Now, if I did my research correctly, there are only 8 guns in the game. This may not sound too bad until you realize about half of them only show up in one level in the game. So through my playthrough, I ended up mostly using the same guns over and over, which ended up being the CAR, the Thompson submachine gun, the Sten, or based on the stage, sometimes I would be able to use a shotgun or sniper. That's it. That is most of the game's main guns that I ended up using anyways. I cannot tell you how bored I got of using these guns by the time I finished the game. It was absolutely insane to me. At first I had a lot of fun using them, but clearly by the end I was totally worn out. For some reason the other game felt like there was more guns in it, and I could of course be wrong, but for some reason it just, I don't know, something just rubbed me the wrong way in this one. Then let's talk about the levels, and I sadly have plenty to say on this. Most levels have a handful of objectives to complete, with some bonus objectives as well. However, most levels are incredibly linear. Now, don't get me wrong, again, the previous game also had linear levels, however, they felt more open and didn't seem as linear when you were playing through them. This game, on the other hand, does feel incredibly linear. A good way to put it is that it looked and played like a hallway shooter, even though it didn't exactly look like one.
Mission failed. We'll get him next time.
Now, the entire game didn't always feel this way, but the majority of it did, which I think is an entirely big problem. There's a difference between a linear game feeling like a linear game, and then a linear game feeling more open. I can't exactly explain what I mean, but when you look at certain games and the way that they are built, you know in your head that it is a linear hallway. They want you to go down a very specific route, but they make it appear like there is much more to do. This game doesn't do that. This game legitimately feels like you are working from one hallway room to the next. While we are still speaking of problems and levels, let's point out how short this game actually is. I beat it in 4 hours. That's right, 4 hours. To be fair, most FPS games aren't very long in length, but I expected more because the previous Medal of Honor game was about double its length. In fact, this is also true about its levels. Medal of Honor Frontline had a total of 19 missions you played through, while Medal of Honor Rising Sun has 9. This is absolutely insane. The previous Medal of Honor game had over double the amount of missions. Did they for some reason get a complaint that the game was too long?
Objection!
No, I don't think that this was the issue. Now, I could just be speculating here, but let's take a look at the release dates. Medal of Honor Frontline came out on the PS2 in May of 2002, with the GameCube and Xbox versions of the game coming out in November of 2002. Then when we look at Medal of Honor Rising Sun, it came out in November of 2003. This means, in the best case scenario, this game was made in a year and a half after Frontline, or worst case, a year after. Now, I know this isn't exactly true since we don't know when the development started, but come on. With the lack of content, the lack of levels, and only some minor improvements, this legit feels like what a game DLC would be for Frontline. I'm pretty sure they used the same engine and similar assets and sounds to guns that carried over, such as the car, the sniper, and the Thompson submachine gun. Honestly, this game was a bit of a letdown to play after the previous one.
He brings that pissing over, and the big surprise is the fucking bass is fucking raw! What the fuck is going on?
Is this game bad? That depends on who you are asking. Now, is this game past its prime? Well, let's just jump into the verdict to find out. The verdict of Medal of Honor Rising Sun is a game past its prime. Now, there are plenty of reasons for this, to be honest, and I'll be going over them in a bit. However, first, I just want to say that this game was very disappointing to play, especially after the game actually ended. I couldn't believe how short this game actually was. I was baffled and thought that maybe I had done something wrong.
You're a fucking idiot. This needs to stop. Now.
Only to jump on the internet and see that no, this game is indeed just that damn short. In any case, let's jump into the top 5 reasons I think this game is past its prime. Number 1. The story is okay at best, but it never really felt complete as the previous game did. In fact, this game basically ended on a cliffhanger that didn't get answered for 3 years. To be fair, I don't think many people cared, but the fact that it ended in that way, and with how short it is, made me feel that the game may have actually been rushed in the way that I suspect it was. Number 2. Speaking of short, this game is just so short. I realize that this is kind of doubling on reason 1, but I can't state this enough. It was so much shorter than I had really expected. Listen, I'm used to FPS campaigns only taking a couple of hours to really beat, but 4 hours? God, that is just so short. Again, when compared to the previous game and its length, it just feels like this one was rushed. Number 3. The lack of content is pretty obvious. Not only is there a lack of guns and weapons, but there's a lack of different environments. Most of them feel very similar to one another with only some minor changes here and there. Honestly, the only way you're going to know you are on different countries or islands is when the game damn well tells you. Otherwise, you will not know by just looking at it. Number 4. The gunplay is overall fine. It's basically the same as the previous game. However, that's actually why I'm placing it here. I expect to see evolving gameplay. I expect to see the game and expand on what was already done. Not basically give me the same thing with a slightly different setting. Don't get me wrong, again, there were some minor improvements, but this felt like more like what we consider nowadays a hotfix more than anything else. Number 5. Honestly, I was bored playing this game all the way through from start to finish. This game felt so much more scripted than the previous game as well. You can tell this just by playing the opening missions. D-Day felt very open-ended with plenty of things you could do to affect the story. While in the attack on the harbor, you just run around corridors to get to the top, where you jump on a gun, shoot down a bunch of ships, and then get thrown into a scripted scene. It just wasn't that close in the fun factor. It almost felt like this game had no soul or passion put into it like the other one did. Like I said before, this game almost feels like what would be considered DLC content today, rather than a full release. In my honest opinion, you could totally skip this game and miss nothing for doing so. Just play Frontline instead, and imagine you are fighting Japanese instead of Germans, and that is what this game is. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did enjoy watching it, please consider subscribing. I upload videos every Sunday. Stay tuned to the end of the video to get an audio hint at what my next video will be. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and thanks for watching.